The reason I chose to write on this subject was I've written 5 other books on the subject of fell running, and I've covered quite a range of things. I've covered history, I've covered women's involvement, but I was at the Three Peaks race in 2022 watching it, and I thought, it's such a big event. There's 800 odd people doing it, and it's something that people have got aspirations to do if they're in the fell running sort of mode. And I just thought, well, I want to do it. And I was able to talk to some of the people on the organising committee and get access to the archival information, which was brilliant because it produced a lot of photographs, and some of the participants provided photographs too. So I knew I had a good set of material, and it was just a question of how I chose to write about it. And I've chose to write about it in the way that I've covered the different people who've been involved, and ask them why they've done it, why they've gone back to do it again, why they might have only done it once, and why it's such an important event, because it crosses over with marathons and ultra running. So it's an interesting contrast in the sport. And that's kind of in a nutshell, although it's quite a big nutshell, why I decided to write it. Well, the race first was run in 1954, but before then people had done a walk around the Three Peaks, which are Pennygent, Whernside and Ingleborough, and it kind of gradually seemed to turn into a challenge to try and do it, and try and do it faster. And then obviously if you're going to do it faster, you've got to run it, and some people tried running it, and got it down to a time of about 5 hours. And so a chap called Fred Bagley said, well, if we put on a race, I think people will do it even faster. But it wasn't a big deal. It was only advertised by word of mouth in 1954. Only half a dozen people did it. But it took a hold, and then the guy decided to carry it on as an annual race. And it's now, it's exploded over the years, and it has 900 people entering each year because it's such an iconic race for people to want to do. Well, the race currently starts in Horton and Ribblesdale in Yorkshire, and it ascends 3 peaks, which are in sequence: Pennygent, Whernside and Ingleborough. And there's a lot of running across moors and fells and tracks in between. So it's almost a marathon distance, and it's significant ascents and descents. So it's managed to get the moniker of the marathon with mountains because of that combination of things. Originally, it started from the Hill Inn in Chapel-le-Dale, but eventually, after about 20 years, it ran out of space because of the numbers of people, and they chose to move it to a different start, and therefore the peaks were done in a different order. But yes, that's it. It goes over the 3 summits that form a natural sort of triangular route in the Yorkshire Dales. Well, if you look at the elite end, then it's literally, the results are a who's who of fell running, from the early days of people like Ron Hill and Joss Naylor and people like that doing it, and now you go through, and it's one of those races that people just seem to put on their list and want to do, and it has a certain similarity to the London Marathon, which marathon runners often want to do just because it's the big one, so to speak, if in the UK. And the Three Peaks race is like that in some ways for people right across the field. And it's a significant race to challenge yourself to do because of the distance and the ascents and descents, but also you have to reach a qualifying standard by doing another race, and you have to meet check-off times within it. So at every level, it's a serious running challenge for anyone who wants to have a go. And on that basis, it's achieved its status. So interestingly, though, in the 1950s, it wasn't something that was offered for women to enter. So it took until 1979 before the first women's race, or the first women's participation in the race, took effect. But after then, it's been, the major players have all gone to it. And you can look at people like, at the elite end, you can look at someone like Sarah Rowell, who's won it multiple times, who was also the record holder for the marathon in the UK. And you can look at Victoria Wilkinson, who's I think the most won the most times for females 5 times. And in 20, I can't remember, 2013, I think it was, Jasmine Paris did it, and she did it. And when I interviewed her, it was because it was such an iconic race. She wanted to include it in her palmares. So yeah, it's definitely had the best of the best going for it, and it's had club runners and everyone. That the percentage of women competing over the years has actually gone up, as it has in many parts of the sport, which is a terrific thing. I spoke to Rob Jebb, who was a multiple winner, who's one of the few people who's actually won. There's a cycle race over exactly the same 3 peaks, and he's won multiple times the cyclocross race and the running race. And it was interesting to talk to him about which he found harder and which was more enjoyable, and his attitude towards it. And he had a strong held view that you needed to be out and away, and you just didn't have to worry about the other people. You just got yourself out there and did it. And he had a very strong amount of confidence. And he told me an interesting story about when one of his daughters was born and she was not well and he wasn't able to train because he was in hospital. But he decided to run anyway because he was getting a little bit depressed and he's getting a bit loose with his time, and he ran it with less preparation than he might normally have had, and managed to win it. And he said basically he won it for his daughter as a sort of, I'm doing this for you, which was an interesting take on it. And there's other people. There's interesting. Joss Naylor, who was one of the iconic runners in the 80s onwards in fell running, never was able to win the 3 peaks race because it wasn't one that suited him. He says it wasn't rough enough because he was used to running up and down Lake District mountains that were way rougher than the 3 peaks in this. So this course doesn't suit everybody, and several people put it to me that the skill set that was required to do well in the race was quite wide. You had to have the ability to run hard uphill and well downhill, and run fast on the flatter bits, and get the pace right. And so it's something that definitely not everyone was suited to. And there's some lovely stories from the people about incidents within the race. So one lady was telling me the story about how she stepped on a rock at some point on one of the boggy parts of the moor, only to find it was a dead sheep. And she disappeared into the bog around this dead sheep. And another poor lass, one of there's a river crossing at one point, and if on a wet day and it's rained a lot, it's a very strong stream and current, and she got washed about 20 meters down the river and was rescued by a fellow runner in it. So there has been some, interesting stories told by the people as I've gone through them. Yeah. It's a book that people should read if they've got an interest in the crossover between the 3 aspects of the sport that it kind of symbolizes, because it really does bring together ultra running because it's over 20 miles of distance, and marathon running because it's that sort of distance, and fell running because of the 3 ups and the downs, and some of the terrain is quite rough underfoot on Ingleborough in particular. So it brings together those aspects, and I think it's in that way it's unique, and that's why I think it has such a profile with people who want to do it. And I've tried to summarize why it's there, what's happened over the years, what's changed. The route has had to change once or twice because of situations on land access and various things like that, and also what it means to people. There's one guy, Dave Scott, who's done it 48 times, and you talk to him and ask him why he keeps coming back, and it's like, well, it's to him it's just like not like a drug, but it's something that he just has to do. And some people do that, and some people just do it once and to get off. But I've tried to summarize the whole story of how it started, how it developed, and who's been there and what it's like, and give a feel through the voices of the people I've interviewed, what it's like to be there and what it's like when it goes wrong. There's people who've been in the lead and got lost. Amazingly, and that story is all in the book for people to see. Well, the fortunate thing is, for the book, I have a very good friend, Denise Park, who was partner of a photographer called Pete Hartley, who had a fabulous collection of pictures from this event and other events. And she and I had published a book already of his work, and so I was familiar with his oeuvre of photographs. And that was a primary source because I knew they were there, and it took a lot of working out to try and use the best ones. He was a photographer who went out onto the hill and took fabulous pictures on the hill rather than just at start and finish. But other people like Dave Woodhead and other photographers would be very generous as well. And all the people I talked to and interviewed, I tried to find from them one photograph at least of them in action. And that involved them having to go and find them and often having to get digital versions of old photographs of people and things like this. But it turned up some marvelous things. There's a fabulous photograph of a chap called Ian Ferguson who chose to do a handspring across the finish line because he could. And I didn't think I would ever get that picture, but by a series of connections that came my way as well, and we were able to include it. So through all the different connections and networking, it's got, I think it's 140 something pictures, and it goes right back to the early days. And I just think the pictorial record just adds another thread to the story that's being told because it's embedded in the book itself. And thank you very much to all the people who were enabling me to use photographs.